Okay, so just to clarify for everyone who is still in the room, just to make sure that this is the live podcast conversation on economic justice for women and girls through reparations, where we'll be discussing women and youth financial inclusion, economic yes, women and youth financial inclusion, economic justice, illicit financial flows, debt cancellation, and decolonizing monetary systems. So everyone who is in this room is attending this session. So uh, I'm ready to begin. Okay. So all protocol observed, good afternoon. It's my absolute honor to host today's conversation where we will be engaging in a crucial conversation on economic justice and reparation for women and girls in Africa. Once again, my name is Patricia Morazi from Akina Mama wa Africa, that you may know as AMWA, and I'll be moderating this discussion alongside a distinguished panel of experts who bring both passion and a depth of knowledge to this topic. So before I invite the panel, I'll just give a bit of context and key highlights of the conversations we have been having since yesterday. So we have been talking about how across Africa, women and girls and young people continue to face systemic barriers to financial inclusion, limiting their access to capital, economic opportunities, and their economic rights. And at the same time, illicit financial flows and unjust debt burdens siphon wealth out of the continent, which is depriving nations of resources that they need to fund critical social services such as education, healthcare, and infrastructure. Sectors that disproportionately impact women and girls due to what we call the feminization of poverty. And we have also talked about how beyond this, we need to confront the colonial roots of our global monetary system, which continues to place African economies in a state of dependency, prioritizing the interests of financial institutions over the needs of people. So as we explore this topic today, we will ask questions like, what would economic and reparative justice look like for women and girls in Africa? And so to help us unpack these questions, I will be in conversation with an incredible group of panelists who I would like to introduce to the floor now. First, I would like to invite Zaitwa Milanzi, who is an advocate. Who is an advocate for women's rights and social justice, currently involved with the Young Urban Women's Network under Action Aid International. She works to empower young urban women, addressing issues of gender inequality, access to services, and economic empowerment. Zaitwa's advocacy focuses on amplifying the voices of young women in urban spaces, ensuring they have a seat at decision-making tables, and promoting their active participation in shaping policies that impact their lives. You're welcome, Zaitwa. Thank you for joining us. Secondly, I would like to invite Caroline Mutoko, a digital thought leader and advocate for women and children. Caroline Mutoko is a renowned Kenyan media personality and philanthropist dedicated to advancing gender equality and empowering women. As the former Group General of Radio Africa Group, she utilized her platform to champion education for women and girls. Her philanthropic efforts are centered on sustainable initiatives that uplift women and girls, reflecting her commitment to creating lasting change. And Caroline's influence extends beyond Kenya as she actively participates in international forums, mentoring young leaders and advocates for gender equality on the global stage. Most welcome, Caroline Mutoko. Nice to meet you. A big round of applause for our panelists, please. Give them some energy. Last but not least, I would like to introduce Dr. Amani Asfor, an Egyptian entrepreneur and medical doctor. She is the president of the African Business Council, chair of the COMESA Business Council's Trade Committee, chair of FEMNET, and president of the Egyptian Women Association. She also leads the African Alliance for Women Empowerment and the Partnership for BPW International. Dr. Asfor is a strong advocate for women's economic empowerment and regional trade in Africa. So you're most welcome, everyone, once again. So before I invite our speakers to share with us, I'll just give some more context of the ongoing discussion so far and just highlight what they'll be speaking about today. So several speakers have spoken at length about how the global economic system was built on enslavement, territorial domination, and gendered oppression, as well as economic exploitation, and how these forces have entrenched vast inequalities and left our nations in a state of economic and political dependency. So within this system, we know that women and girls in Africa are bearing the heaviest burden. They are disproportionately affected by economic disempowerment, labor exploitation, and the consequences of environmental degradation. And these same systems have also devalued and erased the contributions of women, making economic justice a deeply gendered issue, which we'll hear about today when we discuss issues such as women's unpaid care work. So my first question will go to Zaitwa. Zaitwa, as a thought leader in the area of economic justice, what does reparative justice mean to you when it comes to women's economic oppression? And this includes young women and the youth in general. Please, can we have the second microphone? Okay. I'll just repeat the question. As a thought leader in the area of economic justice, what does reparative justice mean to you when it comes to women's economic oppression? And this is also in the context of the conversations we had yesterday of what do reparations mean to us, but now in the context of our economy and for economic justice for women and for the youth and including them in decision making, what do reparations look like to you? I'm sorry, we don't have the second mic.
Thank you so much. So building from yesterday's conversation and to address the question now posed or the prompt now posed, for young women especially, reparations entail, first of all, having a voice in defining what reparations are. So as a starting point, right now, the African Union has the concept note on reparations for the year 2025 on this year's theme. However, the theme is silent on centering women and young women's voices. So a starting point is, first of all, giving women's voices that agency and centering them so that their lived realities are able to influence the policy formulations that will be put together to advance this year's theme. Furthermore on that, reparations for young women also entail being able to give them the necessary platforms and the necessary access to structures and institutions that are going to be implementing and planning what reparations look like for us in the African continent. Otherwise, if the platforms are there, yet because of our patriarchal societies or because of economic injustices, young women are not able to access these platforms, or even because of language barriers, discrimination based on age and sex, we're not able to access these platforms that allow us to define and benefit from reparations. Then that means that there is no meaningful gain for women and young women especially. Finally, this means that we need to ensure that we are supported. There needs to be support for young women's advocacy movements so that we are able to come to the forefront of any steps and measures taken towards reparations. And at the same time, we also need to ensure that women are supported, especially young women, are supported by having investments that give them increased access to the necessary platforms for policy formulation as well as institutional reform when it comes to reparations. That's all for now.
Thank you so much. I've especially picked up on what you said about investing in the youth to take part in these spaces, and I think I'll come back to that when we are talking about women's economic empowerment versus economic justice for women. So just keep that in mind before I get back to you. And now I would like to move on to Caroline and ask you to share with us what you think the current gaps are in addressing reparative justice or economic justice for women.
Thank you. That's actually a really good question. Let me tell you what the gap is, and I will start with how we are viewed. When you look at the way economic activities are classified, primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary, women's work does not even feature in primary. However, this is something else you need to understand. If in the last 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, you've done any of the following: you've ironed clothes, you've cooked, you've taken children to school, you've done homework, I don't know, you've done, let me see what else I put here, a little tidying up, some housework, some cleaning, that is classified as non-primary productive work. So actually, if you look at GDP, it's not calculated. You have been at leisure, ladies. Gentlemen, please be aware that every time you walk into a home that for some reason looks put together, that woman has been doing absolutely nothing economically viable. Let me just build on that. As far as economics is concerned, the fact that you are pregnant and went through labor and delivered a child, in that time you are considered unproductive. Think about it. Every time you leave the office, so every time a woman gets pregnant in a working institution, everybody is very concerned about, now what are we going to do with her? And then the minute she's gone for 3 months to raise a child, she's considered unproductive. So before I actually get to that, and it's not just about how our work is seen. Actually, it's not seen at all. It's the fact that cow's milk, buffalo milk, goat milk, camel milk, all has a value. Breast milk has none. Breast milk has no value. There's no economic value for it. So we walk around and we measure GDP every year. But GDP has never accounted for care work at all. The work of women and children is something that is, number one, invisible and unvalued or undervalued. So until we get to a place where we make the work of women and girls seen, first and foremost, if we don't make it seen, we don't make people understand everything she does is part of how the economic backbone actually exists, reparations will not be possible because we want economic reparations. So our work must be seen and then valued. So I'll leave it at that. Then you can build on it. But just as you sit here, ladies, please remember, everything you do is not even considered an economic measure of production in any form, shape, or manner. And your breast milk is valueless.
A round of applause for our speakers so far. The thing that I've picked up from your conversation, especially on unpaid care work, is how it is made invisible, even if we know that the work of social reproduction that's done by women is what sustains economies. And according to the Oxfam report in 2020, it said that women's unpaid care work actually accounted for about 11 trillion per year. And this is just an approximation, so it's actually more than that. And yet this is still not included. This work is not rewarded, it's not recognized, and there's no effort to reduce it or to redistribute it. And so that's one of the reasons that women are marginalized. And that's why even if we come here and we talk about increasing economic opportunities for women, but because this work, women have to do this work and they're not even being rewarded for it, how are we going to push them to participate in the market economy when we're not putting in place structures and institutions that reduce this work and ensure that it's not only women and girls or gender non-conforming people who are doing this work. So I love that conversation so much on unpaid care work, and thank you for highlighting that. There's something else that you said about how we are seen, and not just as women, but also as Africans. And this has reminded me of the conversations that have been happening recently, especially on the role of aid in Africa. And so there's a certain assumption that shapes conversations about economic justice and the role of aid. And we see aid being presented as this benevolent or charitable flow of resources from the global north to the global south. And so it reinforces this belief that the global north is developing the global south. But when we look at the actual data on unequal exchange that takes place, we know that more resources flow from poor countries to rich countries and not the other way around. And even if we were to actually compute aid, loans, and foreign investment that comes into poorer countries, this still doesn't amount to the aid that's coming in. And so several reports have actually shown us that for every dollar of aid that's received, donor countries are extracting $80 worth of resources from the global south. And for every dollar that comes in, we are losing $30 of our resources. And so this myth that the global north is developing the global south is something that we need to unpack, because it's one of the reasons that we are seeing this pushback against reparations, because they are saying, but we are giving aid and there are all these development programs, but we know that more resources are actually being extracted in form of labor, in financial resources, in illicit financial flows. And so we need to make that conversation hard more. We shouldn't buy into this myth that this dependency on the global north is not manufactured, because we know it is. And so I love that when we talk about how we should also change the way that we are seen, because reparations are also about memory and about remembering and an accurate telling of history. So thank you so much for that. I'll move on to our third speaker, but I'll be coming back to both Caroline and Zaitwa. So keep your thoughts ready. So when we talk about unfair trade policies and trade liberalization, because today we have also come to talk about decolonizing monetary systems. And so when we talk about the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement and women, because that's something that was also discussed, I think, in the 39th GIMAC session, and it was also included in the outcome document, which recognized that women account for up to 70% of informal cross-border traders in Africa. And so in that outcome document, we called for the implementation of Articles 13 and 19 of the Maputo Protocol on Economic Rights of Women as a necessary condition to guarantee their maximum participation in the economy. And so I would like for you to share your thoughts with us on what potential is there with this agreement, but also because we know that trade policies and trade liberalization affects women differently due to gender inequalities, and like we've talked about, because of unpaid care work and the lack of access to fixed assets such as land. So I will invite you to tell us what would it mean, or what would economic justice look like for women in trade, women in the informal sector, beyond having the word gender equality just inserted into different policies and different agreements without us seeing any concrete actions to make sure that it's actually implemented and that women can safely participate in the economy. Over to you, Dr. Amani.
Thank you, my dear. Thanks a lot. And thank you for really highlighting the ACFTA, which is our flagship program. So, ladies and gentlemen, sisters and brothers, the issue of reparation is really about not the past, it's about transforming the future. Till now, we are still exploited. Till now, minerals of Africa are smuggled outside the continent with no value addition or beneficiation. This, by all means, is not acceptable. The multinational companies are still, till now, they are benefiting from us in Africa, and we are not harnessing the financial resources of our real continent. So what does ACFTA means to us? What is reparation means to us? Why do illicit financial flows go? We are losing every year $88 billion through illicit financial flows So whether through tax, through corruption, whatever, debt cancellation. We're talking about debt, which is, we are paying the interest of debt every year, and almost $70 billion, while again, we are not investing it in women or in her education, in her health, in her enterprises, nothing. So how does this whole economic policies address the issue of reparation, address the issue of economic justice, and how can the ACFTA, with its youth and women protocol, come in to really empower our women economically for trade? But before trade, it's about manufacturing, because I always say, are we going to trade among ourselves containers coming from India or China? Or we trade among ourselves made in Africa products with value addition and beneficiation of our African resources. So this is the whole issue. The real issue is about empowering our women and making sure that they are value adding our mineral resources, our agricultural resources, all our renewable energy resources. We have a lot of resources on the continent. So the equation now is, what can really do the government can do? They have to have whole economic reparation policies that would really address the multinational companies. They cannot come and have gaining from Africa unless they are really paying their taxes, and they don't give incentives as much as we give to the African private sector. So we need to have preferential treatment actually for our African private sector, because they are the one who really should be empowered. The second issue, that we need to have a reparation fund which gives zero interest to our women access to finance. Because as you rightly said, 80% of our women are into work and also with informal sector, but yet they have less than 10% access to credit. And when they want to go to finance or credit, there is huge interest that is affecting them. So what we really need to have with this reparation fund is to have a zero interest. And we have to have all the stakeholders. We as civil society organization, we have to have a reparation task force, to see how does this impact our women on the ground, and how we are going to do with the whole dilemma of this reparation. It's really not about addressing it through the AU, but putting it on the ground with solid recommendations to the AU, and to make sure that we are addressing the whole reparation. 2024 was the end of the UN Declaration of People with African Descent. One of the things we're trying to do really is also how we connect with our sisters and brothers in diaspora. In November, we did a big congress, the Africa Caribbean Businesswomen Forum. And we started talking about the whole issue of connecting together and making sure that we benefit each other with our expertise. We make trade among ourselves, because within the ACFTA among ourselves, but also how we make it among our sisters, brothers in the Caribbean or diaspora, because they need us. Many of the things that they are importing, like for instance, here in Ethiopia, there is leather. They are importing leathers from other way. They asked how to import from here, how to have expertise with cassava agriculture, how to make a lot of things. So the whole issue really is making practical steps towards this reparation. We have to have the policy, we have to have the action plan, what we should do, and we have to have the funding mechanism which can really implement our action plans for this whole project that we need regarding the whole reparation and economic justice. So for us, I believe here at GIMAC, we are starting this conversation on the margin of AU Summit, which is exactly they are talking about also reparation. We need to come all of us together to put a plan of action, a policy, recommendations of how this reparation could happen and how it impacts our women on the ground, from the big women at the board level till the grassroots women like Kilimanjaro, our sisters. How does it affect you? In agriculture, small-scale miner, I just came from Cape Town yesterday. We had the mineral mining in Daba and the alternative mining in Daba, and we were talking the same thing. Exploitation of the multinational companies till now, the small-scale artisana are affected by health. They are affected very dramatically. And after that, all the minerals, it goes out with billions of dollars. We are wasting our money because there is no really policy that would address this. So for us, real economic justice is putting the right policy, putting the right plan, addressing it, and enforcing it, whether to the global north or to multinational companies happening here. And all this will not happen except if we empower our own selves, the African private sector. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amani. And you've highlighted illicit financial flows and the debt burden. And just to recap what she said, we lose about 89 billion every year in illicit financial flows. And just to bring this closer to home, these are resources that should be funding our sectors, such as healthcare, education, environmental protection, and crucial gender equality initiatives. But instead, because of the debt burden that we are facing, we are seeing an over-reliance by our government on things like indirect taxation, and this disproportionately impacts women. So when public services are defunded, we see, especially the example of the COVID-19 pandemic, when in times of a crisis or an emergency, these are the sectors that are always the first to be defunded. That's health, that's education. So we now see how the debt crisis is also exacerbating the gender inequality and women's economic oppression. And that's why we call for debt cancellation. We call for curbing illicit financial flows. We call for putting an end to tax havens. And that's why our work around the UN Framework Convention on International Tax Cooperation is very important, as well as our work on debt, because all these issues are interconnected. And I love that she did that work for us of connecting the issues for us as well. So you have also spoken a lot, actually all the speakers, about investing in women, which brings us to a crucial conversation on women's economic empowerment versus economic justice for women. So whenever we hear the word women's economic empowerment, it is supposed to be a positive thing, but it has also been reduced to merely integrating women into the market, where we see them framed as mere drivers of economic growth. And one example I'll give is, for those who are following the conversation on financing for development, the outcome document, the zero draft that recently came out with the recommendations, we see when they are calling for an increase in investment in women, they're saying that this should be done because of the potential of women as economic drivers of growth. But women are more than that. We take part in the economy. Like she said, women's unpaid care work is invisibilized. This doesn't mean that women don't work. Women have always worked historically, even when this work has not yet been recognized, when it was not remunerated, women still worked. So it's important that when we call for economic justice, we are calling for more than just pushing women into the economy, calling for an increase of women's job opportunities, because we also need to talk about the situation in which they are working. We need to make sure that the work environments are addressed. Otherwise, we are just pushing women into hostile work environments in precarious jobs where they have no protections. Like we have discussed earlier, women make up about 70% of the informal economy. And we know that in the informal economy, there are hardly any protections, especially legally. And so we have to do more than calling for women's integration into the economy. We have to call for economic justice, especially. And so what I would want to throw back to the speakers, when we have said that women's value is more than how we view it in a capitalist lens, and so we shouldn't just emphasize their role as consumers or talk about women as cheap labor, which is the reason that investors should come to Africa. No, that is not economic justice for women. But if we reimagined economic justice beyond this market-driven framework, instead of pushing women into exploitative systems and focused on dismantling the systems that perpetuate inequality, what would this look like? How do we shift the conversation beyond merely integrating women into the economy and actually talking about transforming the systems that exist so that women can work in dignity? Yeah, so, okay.
I love your question. I'm a former radio presenter, and what I love is to be able to leave you with something that you will argue about and debate about over coffee, tea for the next few days. Let me start with something that I had to do a couple of years ago when I was on radio, and I'm gonna make this really fast. I found out that Kenyan girls don't have sanitary towels, and I'm a private school brat who did not understand, what do you mean you don't have sanitary towels, when I first heard the problem. And I was told, well, they don't because they can't afford them. And I was like, okay, not a problem. Got on radio, started talking about it, hoping to create some awareness. Of course, I was met with the people who would meet me and tell me we don't talk about those things in the morning on radio. However, as the conversation, of course, gathered steam, I was met with a legislator who asked me, but Caroline, what is the problem? And I said, they don't have sanitary towels. She told me, no, that's not the problem. What's the problem? I said, they can't afford them. She said, leave it with me. She comes back to me a week later and she says, I'll tell you what the problem is. It's the taxation on it. I come from a country where you cannot tax sanitary towels. And if you dare, we go mad. Yeah? In Kenya, you can't. I mean, the women parliamentarians would be in so much trouble. And they were in trouble in 2024. And that's because, hello, Kenyan table over there, Justice Dokin Dongo is the one who helped me move the legislature on the floor of the House. In Kenya, at the National Treasury, sanitary towels were classified under luxury goods with cognac, cigars, and Mercedeses. So we got rid of the VAT on sanitary towels. So coming back to you, until the day, and she talked about policies, until the day we make legislature understand that you cannot count GDP without counting the work of women, we can't get there. We must. Every time you record your GDP numbers, because this is how they do it. And by the way, my first degree is in economics and maths. So to measure GDP, you assume that there is some form of production, service, and consumption that happens within a country. And then you must know where that production happens. Apparently, nobody knows what we do. So they push us to the marketplace, as you call it, because they're trying to get more work for us. Women have always worked. And let me qualify that by reminding you all, I'm not just a firstborn, I'm a firstborn daughter. So my work is compounded. But the work I do every time my mother calls and says, your father is not well, that's not taken care of. But remember, you have done very well by making sure that I have a board position and I have a GM position in the workplace. That one is quantified. But spending an afternoon making sure my father gets his CT scan, then goes to see his urologist, that is not an economic activity. Legislature and the parties and the bodies in our countries, in our nations, that count and tell us GDP must begin to count what GDP looks like with our work in it. Because without our work in it, I guarantee you, and please quote me, a few things will begin to grind to a halt and GDP might just be reduced without the invisible work of women and girls. We must legislate and demand that GDP must account for what we do. Women, as you said, have always worked. Don't act like when you put us in corporate spaces is when we are working. But remember when I started, what did I tell you? Apparently, all that ironing and cooking and cleaning you do is not work. And should you dare get pregnant and take 3 months off to raise that child, you are considered economically unproductive. Legislate it, country by country, nation by nation, but ensure, and we need to ask for this, that when you count GDP, have you counted our contribution? I hope I've answered your question without starting.
Abash GDP, abash. Abash GDP, abash. Abash neoliberalism, abash. Abash GDP, abash.
Thank you so much. Zaitwa, over to you now.
That was so well put together. I just have to applaud it one more time. Can I applaud that one more time because that was powerful. Thank you so much for that. Just as an add-on to what has previously been said, as we begin to recognize and value women's work, it's also important that we do not let the spaces that women currently are most productive in become dominated by the same institutions, cultural norms, and practices that are working to disadvantage women in the current system as it is. So, for example, it means that if we begin to value and count women's work, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden the sector should become male dominated. That all of a sudden it now becomes an issue of I can't go to work now because the same issues that I'm going to face in the general manager's office are the same issues I will face in the care sector. It then defeats the whole purpose of trying to reimagine our current economic status quo. So that's something that we also need to be aware of as we try to reimagine what the economy can be like in relation to women's economic justice. And at the same time, it's very important that women should not be kept in the private sector. I think as you were explaining, the divide was clear. There's this work that is done in the public. It's in the public sector. You're serving people. And then there's work that we do in the private. Yet I'm still serving people. I'm still feeding people. These women sang today that if they don't work, there is no food on the table. Women are consistently serving and uplifting our economies, but because it's done in a private sector, and I'd say quote unquote private sector, we want to just sort of put a cloth over it and discount it. So it's important that we lift this veil that comes between the private and the public sector with regards to women's work and valuing and recognizing that women's work. So it's all about reimagining it. And I think in Malawi, when we're advocating for this especially, people come to you and say, how will it work? How does it work? What you're saying is nonsense. And it's like, no, it's called a reimagining, and it actually works in some jurisdictions. So we also need to be able to learn from the jurisdictions where this works. Like right now, in Malawi, I can say I'm learning from the Kenyan jurisdiction where they don't impose taxes on sanitary pads, right? In Malawi, though, when we bring that up, they take away the tax from the sanitary pads and they will put that same tax on pens and pencils. What have you solved? What have you solved? Because still you are disadvantaging the most marginalized groups, which are women, young girls, and children in general. So it's important that we need to be proactive when advocating for these things. We need to be proactive so that when one part goes right, we don't inadvertently let the other side rot. We need to make sure that we're moving hand in hand and we are paying attention to what's happening in all aspects, the private life and the public life, so that we can reimagine and recreate the economic future for women and children and girls. Thank you.
Thank you. So just to talk about something she said about this false dichotomy of the private and the public realm, we need to also understand that this is a false binary that's also created to maintain this system. They say that these issues are for the public and this is for the private because they don't want this work to be recognized or rewarded. So they tell you this is in the private realm, and so it's domestic work. There's no need for the government to interfere. But that's actually part of the system, which is why we must debunk this false myth of there being a public realm and a private realm, because we exist in all these realms. There's no point at which you say, okay, so now I'm moving into the private realm. No, you're there every single time. And also something that she said about reducing and redistributing this care work, and people ask you, how should that be done? But we have actually talked about it severally, and we have talked about funding public sectors, because like we gave the example of COVID-19, whenever there's a breakdown in these sectors, such as health, such as education, it's women who actually come in to close those gaps. When the health systems failed, who was doing the work of caring for the ill? Who does the work of caring for the elderly? It's women and girls. And that's why we have to fight for these sectors to be funded. We have to fight for gender perspectives in the budget. We have to call for gender responsive budgeting, so to speak, because once these sectors are funded, this is going to reduce the burden that is put on women's labor, because the people are able to access education, they're able to access health in case of an emergency, people have access to social protections. And so that is how we reduce and redistribute this care work, aside from the shifting culture and social norms as well. And so thank you so much to our beautiful panel. You still
Yes.
have, okay,
Sorry. Yeah, it's okay, fine. Because we talk about economic empowerment. So economic empowerment is not actually a one-man show. It's a multifaceted approach. It has to involve the government, the civil society, the private sector, of course. So I call it the triad of empowerment that involves 3 pillars. The first pillar is personal empowerment programs. I need all what we're doing about training, capacity building, empowering the women to have access to education, to be self-confident, to self-esteem, because she's the one running the show. So she needs to have this power by herself. The second pillar is policy advocacy. As civil society, we're advocating with the government to have the real economic empowerment with financial inclusion. And let me wear my other hat now as the co-chair for the Foreign Relations Committee of National Council of Women, which is the gender machinery of Egypt. We have a special program in Egypt for really financial inclusion for women, even at the grassroots, the villages, even though who don't write or read. But they are very good, well trained, that now all of them have their mobiles and they can trade among with the mobile wallets, with the central banks. I think it's very important to include all the women, even at the grassroots. One of the things also we're advocating is about the government procurement, because I was successful in Kenya when I was chair of Commissioners Council to lobby Uhuru Kenyatta to have 30% of government procurement for SMEs, women, youth. It was me actually who lobbied for it. So now I am lobbying it at Africa Council to have at least 40% of government procurement goes to African private sector, including SMEs, women, and youth. So I hope we all advocate for that, because this is actually how we leverage the women. Not all the time about microfinance, ladies. We have to graduate ourselves from this. We have to go for the global economy. So this is actually how we empower the women. The third pillar is about product development. Because if talking about trade, I cannot bring, as I mentioned, things from India, from China, from whatever, and sell it. No, we have to have product development, empower our women with innovation. We're linking with science, technology, business incubators, technology hubs, to have a made in Africa product which is competitive, value added, which is highly quality, or fashion Africa. Gemstones, this is from Madagascar. I always bring things. In Madagascar, they have 70% of, for instance, the fire of the world. Yet, it goes to Jupiro, India, to be cut and polished there, and go to international market. We're losing out our own resources. In Malawi, you have a lot of gemstones. In Zambia, you have emerald. Who is here from Zambia? Anybody from Zambia? Hi, lovely ladies. Hi. So just to tell you what we are losing, I was in Italy in a biggest jewelry show in the world called Vicenza Oro. The first thing I see a collier with emerald and diamond. And I asked how much. It was $500,000. I said, from where emerald? They said, proudly of Zambia. And there is nobody in the whole show from Zambia or even from Africa. They are taking our resources. This is the real justice. How we make this emerald on the continent, how we have this $500,000 goes to our women, the small-scale miner, instead of going outside. So the real economic empowerment is managing our own resources and equipping our own women with skills, with technology, with education, financing our own women, and marketing her Made in Africa product. Because we believe our logo is financial independence gives you the power of choice and voice. Without financial independence, we have no choice or voice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amani. In saying that, you have actually reminded us of one of the core elements of reparations, which is the right to self-repair. It's us to decide what form we want reparations to take, and that's the form we're saying we want. So thank you so much, Dr. Amani. And so, as we said earlier, this session is for us to together, to reimagine together, and to think together. So I'm going to invite the rest of the audience to either comment or ask questions to the panel. And yes, ask questions to the panel, and then we'll come back and get 3 key recommendations from each of you to close off the session. So while you'll begin by just answering a few of the questions if they are directed to you, or you have something to add, and then you'll give us your 3 key recommendations in your closing. Thank you so much. So over to the... Okay.
Ok, donc merci beaucoup pour ce panel. Je m'appelle Bahati Rubango. Je travaille pour Women's International Peace Center. Je viens de Kinshasa, en République démocratique du Congo. Alors, les réparations, ça c'est un problème très très crucial.
Okay, yes, let's just give them a second to all get their mic so that they don't miss anything that you're sharing. Just one more, I think.
But I can also speak in English.
Whichever language you're more comfortable speaking in.
Oh,
We
okay.
have both facilities, yes.
French or English? Okay.
French to make the interpreters work and to make us use and for the francophone.
Okay, so thank you so much. I was saying that thank you for the panel. There was good discussion. My name is Bahati Rubango. I work for Women's International Peace Center in Democratic Republic of Congo. I loved so much the way you discussed this topic, how women are affected by economic justice. And I wanted a little bit to highlight 2 elements and give one recommendation from Democratic Republic of Congo context. So one, what we have done in DRC is that we have lobbied for the reparation law. The reparation law because women in DRC have been affected by the conflict. And when you do the mapping of the conflict in DRC, you will only locate them when you have minerals, like in Ruchuru, Masisi, Rubaya, those minerals which need to make technology, to make good phones like these smartphones that we have, the cows, those minerals are found in Democratic Republic of Congo. And they are exploited illegally where the blood is there, and they are taken by multinational companies that affect really women. So where women have been going to cultivate, to do blah, 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 stop. On the second way, where women have to do like a cross-border trading rights, like cross-border on DRC Rwanda, DRC Burundi, Burundi Uganda. Because of the conflict, like because of COVID, the borders are closed. Like as per now we are talking, the border of Burundi and Rwanda is closed. Do you imagine those women who live on the daily basis of that kind of trade? They can no longer work. So they cannot go to the field because of the conflict, because of the insecurity, but they cannot also do business because of the issue which is going on. So it is from this perspective that we lobbied in DRC. And we have a chance of getting 18% of the tax from the mineral to go to that funds. But what the challenge is, how this money is also affected. Is that money benefiting to women-led organization, or is it going again in politics? That's another question mark. So my suggestion would be like to create like a kind of barometer that will be able to monitor the reparation on the country, or the task force like the last speaker on this side highlighted. That will be able that, yes, we have policies, yes, we have the fund, but this money is also profiting to people who are victims. Otherwise, it will be that the money is there, but the money is profiting to the people who are bringing war, the people who are now bringing issues. So if we can do that, and this will be at national level, regional, and continental level, because all this mineral, like you can see, is going like to Europe, to China, to Russia, to France, I don't know, for those countries in the United States. And yeah, of course, that one profiting. We are to be victims, we are to be raped, we are to be, yeah, all which is bad is on us, but the mineral and the money is coming from our continent, and we are not benefiting from that. So if we can think about that, to ask the AU to set a policy which will also hold accountable those enterprises buying those minerals, to be accountable and to find a way of, providing reparation. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Doris Munyingi, and my question is to Dr. Amani. Hi, Dr. Amani. We are 2 years post the AU agenda of the AFCFTA, and there are a lot of recommendations that went out when it comes to the opening of the borders for trade. But for someone who works with grassroots women and girls, for me, I feel as though we are yet to feel the reality, the implementation of AFCFTA. Actually, before we had this session, we were discussing in this table because one of us works with women across the borders specifically. And we are asking ourselves, even as we talk about justice for reparations, and now we are linking it to economic justice, how do we continue to have this discussion even with the implementation of the AFCFTA? That is still yet to be seen. So maybe from your perspective, how has that implementation looked like 2 years post the theme of the AU? Because now we are discussing a new theme, but in real sense, what has that looked like from your level? Because from a grassroots perspective, I think we are still struggling to even understand we know what the theme meant, but when it comes to implementation, we are yet to surely understand and feel the weight of that implementation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that very insightful discussion. I've got two points to make, and these are with regard to the issue of women's unpaid work. With regard to women's unpaid work, I think us in Africa, we are sort of behind in the sense that if you look at our Western counterparts, for example, in Scandinavian countries, GDP actually includes women's unpaid work as an element of that calculation. And so this is what we need in Africa as well, to transition from the way we calculate GDP to include women's unpaid work, which is very, very productive. And we need to accept that as governments, as policymakers, and as legislatures. However, it is said that if you cannot measure it, there's nothing you can do about it. And so there's a question of how do we generate our statistics as African governments? Generally in Africa, for example, in Zambia, where I come from, generally statistics are usually desegregated by sex, women and men. There's no nuance in terms of what role exactly do women play, for example, in the labor sector. So we need to get to a point where we begin developing statistics beyond those dry statistics that just desegregate sex, women and men, but get into gender statistics, look at the actual roles that men and women play in the economy, in the family, in the educational sector, in the health sector, and so on and so forth, so that we can begin to measure those statistics and apply them in our policy making and in our legislative process. Secondly, with regard to the issue of economic justice and reparations, I'm of the view that it is important that before we get to to look at the West in terms of, what the West owes us in terms of reparations. I think we need to be honest with ourselves and be accountable to ourselves and demand accountability from our governments, demand accountability from our policymakers, demand accountability from our legislators before we begin pointing fingers at the West, because it is our own governments that owe our women and girls reparations before we go to the, to the outer world out there. So we need to be honest with our discussion. This is the reason why I was having a discussion with some people over lunch that sometimes in these big meetings we tend to be disingenuous in the sense that we avoid discussing certain issues deliberately. But it is time that we demanded accountability from our own governments, demanded accountability and transparency from our own policymakers and from our own legislators. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So my name is Mdina Beba. I work for the Strategic Initiative for Women in the Horn of Africa. Thank you for the panelists and that comprehensive overview. But my thing is that I know a lot of us are here in this room as a result of capitalism, and I know we are like the privileged few. But when we talk about reparations and when we talk about without talking about global economic system, without deeply interrogating capitalism as a system, as a global system, how far can we go? Because I'm a Pan-African feminist and my feminism is rooted in unpacking power imbalance. And we're not necessarily talking about replicating the same systems in Africa, are we? Without deeply challenging the capitalistic mode of production, how can we talk about these things? And also what our brother said, yes, we must hold the state accountable and the member states, but it's not an either-or situation. I think when we talk about reparations, when it comes to the colonial system, that's a different topic. We're asking for what's owed. We're asking for our birthright. It's our legitimate right. It doesn't mean we shouldn't, hold our governments accountable. But I think the focus when we talk about reparative justice is about colonization and the continued system of global inequality that situates Africa and African women where we are today. So I think we need to deeply talk about capitalism and call it what it is. I don't think we should water it down, sugarcoat it. It is called capitalism, and capitalism is what's killing African women. So I think I just wanted to assert that. Thank you.
We'll just take 3 more people because we have to go back to the panel for recommendations and close. So just 3 more hands. Who are the 3? 1. Okay, 4 people. Please make it fast. Okay, 1. She'll go first, 2nd, 3rd, 4th. Okay, then those 3 will be the last. Just please, in 1 minute, just make your point really fast because we have to come back and report to the rest of the groups.
Okay. Hi, my name is Flora Kone. I'm from Burkina Faso. And my country is faced to the security crisis. So justice, reparative justice, and economic justice is a need. So I have a question. My first question was already been asked by one of the participants. It was about the perspective, the vision. But the second one, I have to ask, how can we foster ongoing dialogue about economic future for women and girls beyond the reparation in our countries? Thank you.
Thank you. I am from Uganda. My name is Lenam Stella Angel, the director of the War Victims and Children Networking. My question is, if we are talking about justice, how can we ensure that women and girls have justice in the Africa. In the different country, and the trials start to take the place, they use girls and women. I am among of them. I was being adoption when I was 10 years. I stayed with the rebels for 9 years. I came back home, and many women and girls in Uganda went through gender-based violence. Men sleeping with women when they are young, and in our country, we have a good laws, but it is in the paper. How can women in the Africa do sure that the different policy in the different country they should use to gathering the women and children? And the last, my appeal to the women in Africa, they should involve the victims too in the different front line, both in the EU and also in the different city. They have to put representative of the victims. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Wamboi from Kenya, and as we discussing about reparations, for me it's more of acknowledging and also redressing the past and the future injustices. If we were to look at the past injustices, and for us to also advance the economic justice for women and girls through reparations. And when we talk about illicit financial flows, we cannot ignore the fact that in Africa there is a lot of corruption. And there's a lot of money that is going out of our region, going out through corruption. So I want to support someone who was saying we need to demand accountability from our government. But today I also want us to demand accountability from the AU. AU has African Union Convention on combating corruption. That is a treaty in the AU. They also have a body, AU advisory body on corruption. What is AU doing? I know AU is not here, but we need to ask those questions. What are they doing to hold accountable the member states in terms of corruption? Also, we have seen political interferences and undermines institutional independence in different countries. What is AU doing? Because we have these policies. We come here every year, we comment to them. What are they doing with their policies that are already in place? Thank you very much.
Thank you, the presenters. My name is Tuonge Gondwe. I like what Dr. said about Malawian women who don't even know that they are gemstones in their country. But my plea to you, Doctor, is build the capacity. Women, we are already mobilized. We are in groups. Build our capacity so that we can be investing in those. We need us to be minors. We need the policies which can allow us to be the minors. Malawi, most of it is patriarchal society. So some of these jobs, we look at it as if it is men's job. That's why we are. And there's this, we heard that a lot of miners or a lot of investors are coming into our country. They are taking our minerals, but since they are saying there are samples. So how long will there be samples? And how can us as Malawians know that this is a sample or this is not a sample? They are doing business. They are taking our resources. Thank you.
Okay, so I have to apologize. We have to close the plenary session and go back to our panel, but this is an ongoing discussion, so we'll have opportunities to share more of our thoughts, so don't worry about that. I'm so sorry I have to cut you off, And so I'll first give it back to the panel to share their thoughts and also answer a few questions. But also, as you're speaking, remember to give us your 3 key recommendations in your closing. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all your questions and comments. I would really start by the issue for cross-border traders. It's very important because, and my sister from Kenya talked about ACFTA. You know, we have now at ACA the protocol for women and youth, but we should do 2 things: sensitization about it, because not everybody knows about it, and actually to put a plan of action for the implementation of it. And if we talk about the cross-border traders, they don't know even what is ACFTA, and they don't know what are we doing here in the 5 Stars Hotel. So this is one thing that we are talking about, how we make awareness campaigns for the cross-border traders and go on the ground, and also with the customs officials, how we make training for customs officials to make sure that they really understand about ACFTA, and make sure that we all implement the whole issue with non-tariffs. Because if the woman does not know her right, she will still be exploited, she will still be harassed. So the whole issue is really, this is a very important work for us as civil society. I personally did one for COMESA trade regime, a questionnaire between Egypt and Sudan, between Djibouti and Ethiopia, Zambia, Zimbabwe, to ask the cross-border women traders what they need and what are their things. So again, this, we have to do it together, and we are already talking with ACFTA to make sure that we put a whole program with reference to it. One moment. I dropped my notes. So the issue again of the reparation task force, yeah, this is actually one of the things I said, and my brother, he's also talked about it from GRC. So this is one of the recommendations, to establish a gender reparation task force that we are involved in, to see how can we what policies we need for the women and the impact of this on the women. Again, we can also put with reference to the recommendation to have a reparation fund for gender, which talks to make sure that the women who are starting their business have access with zero interest fund. Malawi, we are already now putting together a project which is called the African Center for Cutting and Polishing Gemstones on the Continent, and Mama Joyce Panda is really championing it with us. So we'll be happy to see how we set one in Malawi, because it's very important to set it. Again, very important things with reference to the corruption, of course. Corruption is everywhere, but this is an enforcement of law. Because if we put the policies, but we need enforcement of law. I think this is a real issue for good governance that we are lobbying for. And so we have to really look for it. Capitalism, my sister. So do you want us to go to socialism? It's not really about capitalism or socialism. It's about good governance and rule of law. If we don't have good governance in all the governments, then whether it's capitalism or socialism, it will be the same thing. So what we have to put together is to have a role, the laws and the enforcement of laws, and to make sure that we have economic growth, because all the political instabilities also is about resources. My brother, GRC, what's happening now is because of the lithium. You have a lot of lithium, and lithium now by 2030 will need 300 million electrical cars. Who will industrialize the lithium batteries for the electrical cars? They are smuggling the lithium from Africa to go there to be industrialized outside the continent. So our main really stress and force is to see how we value add and beneficiate our own minerals, our own resources, so we have economic growth, and then we really own our fate. Thank you.
I don't know how to speak what I call the development agenda jargon. So what I'll do is go for the jugular and hope you will forgive me, but also walk away with what you need to. I'm a daughter of capitalism, a daughter of colonialism, and a daughter of Beijing, okay? For me, I understand this, that every time we talk about the economy, and every time we talk about economic empowerment and making it look like it's about putting more women in corner suites and behind desks, for every woman who's been put in a board position, for every woman who occupies an office, there's a woman who's doing her job at a fee. I'm here, but my kids were dressed, were fed, their clothes were ironed by somebody who I pay. So let's also not pretend we do not know the value of the work women do. That for me is crucial, that we do not act like, oh, we're not quite sure how to quantify care work. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. However, and I want to go back to something you said, and you said it's very easy for the world to say that we empowered women because we're putting them in rooms such as this. The truth is, women have always worked, as you said, but let me add another line. Women are always working. The minute we break from this plenary, half of you will be on the phone checking on something, and it will not necessarily be business. It will not be, you will be checking whether, oh, is mom okay? Is dad okay? Have the children come from school? Has this been done? Has the, I don't know, costume for the play that was happening today happened? Because that's how we are. We are probably the only part of the economy other than the internet that does not go to sleep. Because we can't. If we do, things will fall apart radically. Therefore, I just want to say, create and implement comprehensive national policies. National care policies. I'm from Kenya. There's one underway. It was sent back to the ministry that is crafting it by cabinet. Cabinet have to take it up, but the rest of us have to be there to make sure it happens. Incorporate the economic value of unpaid care work and provide appropriate compensation to support caregivers. Somebody said something very strange the other day on a podcast in Nairobi and said that apparently millennials and Gen X are the last of the line of those who will look after their parents in their old age. Gen Z are not playing that game. We've got to be very, oh no, is there Gen Z in the room? We've got to be very careful about how we value care. Because if we don't, and I know you look at me like, Caroline, you're right. My generation is not playing that game. They will not pay black tax. They are refusing. And the reason it's called black tax is that once again, it is not recognized. So inclusive policy making is crucial, led by women, it's very important, and reflecting the voices and needs of women and children. I also need to say this. It's very crucial we also understand this. Poverty will never leave this continent until we begin to value care work. Because while a woman is doing this job, she doesn't save, she doesn't invest, and nobody gives her a pension. So when finally her sunset years come and she's no longer economically viable because she can't do the work we had made her do that we did not value, we simply replace her. It's almost like replacing this chair, and it's not on. And for us to do what it is we're talking about in this room, it's not going to take an economic shift in mind. It's going to take a humanity revolution, where humanity as a whole and the continent begins to say that the work women do matters. And that's a revolution about the way we think. And it's a revolution about humanity. And reparation, by the way, is not a kindness. It's not a cuteness. It's justice. And it must be given. But it starts by recognizing that care is real and the work we do matters, and it matters financially. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm also just going to add on to what has been said already. First of all, to my sister in Malawi, yes, Dio, I see you. I'm also from Malawi. I'm a legal practitioner in Malawi. When it comes to the mining laws in Malawi, it is such a dangerous system that we have, because the laws in Malawi are deliberately put in place to keep women and young people and people who don't have access to $30,000 on a whim out of that industry. That is what happened with the mining laws in Malawi. So even if I applaud you for working with Dr. Joyce Banda to set up an institution, capacity building, that is important. But what is the point of building capacity if to enter that industry and to actually participate in that industry, I have to produce $50,000, $30,000. No urban woman in Malawi is going to be able to come up with that at a whim. So those are the the issues that come up. And that goes to my first recommendation, that there needs to be a policy, legal, and institutional reform, because our institutions and our legal systems promote the giants, the companies, the multinational companies, the children of nepotism to come into industries and dominate those industries. So the problem is not capitalism, although capitalism can contribute to the problem. Another problem is the monopolization of certain industries, and this monopolization is enabled through institutions, laws, and policies that don't try to protect those who are most vulnerable, those who are most in need, and those who are most marginalized. And going to my second recommendation is the issue of funding. Funding is so important because, yes, we're here right now. And what we are talking about right now, I work with young women in Malawi. What we're here talking about right now needs to be disseminated. Information is important, as we have consistently been stating. Information is so important. But to get that information out there, it means that we need data bundles. It means that we need to be able to print. We need to be able to bring people together. And that needs transportation costs. When those women leave their homes, they need to pay someone to look after their children for that day so they can come and gather in these rooms and these offices, right? So where there is no funding, that becomes a barrier to the advocacy work that we're doing. And I think that also answers the concern that came up, that how do we involve women, whether it be in issues of GBV, so on and so forth. There needs to be more funding to support efforts to empower women and raise their consciousness to the issues that impact their day-to-day lives. And that's my final point is to do with someone had asked Flora had asked, how can we foster economic dialogue for women and girls in our countries? So part of my advocacy with Action Aid involves working with women and girls. These aren't women with a master's degree in economics or a first degree in math. These are women who are getting their first diploma. Some of the women have not even gone as far as their final secondary education. But they still talk economics. Economics does not have to be some deep, complicated, yes. Because I was really intimidated when the program with Action Aid rolled out and they said we're going to talk about macroeconomics, microeconomic policies. I didn't know what that was because I was like, economics, how am I going to start? But I was like, let me find out. It doesn't have to be complicated because at the end of the day, I come from a household where my mother was the one who would sit down and say, okay, today we need tomatoes, so we need 2,000 kwacha. Tomorrow we'll need to pay the water, so we need this money. Women talk economics already. They know how much it costs to run a household per month, per week, every day. They know that for this child to be able to go to school with the adequate drink, with adequate food, they need to provide them with so much money. So women already know what economics is. It's just that sometimes we try to make it more than it is by packaging it in these complex terms and figures. But at the end of the day, it's a matter of sitting down and saying, hey, how much do your sanitary pads cost? Why is it that they cost that much? Or the government is taxing you on this product. That's how you engage people. Just make it a conversation about our day-to-day realities as opposed to complicating it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much to our wonderful panelists. And I just want to add on something that has been said. Like she said, we make economics sound so complicated because some of the things that have come from the room, especially about GDP and how it doesn't account for unpaid care work, while we come here in this room to reimagine, we should also know that there's a world beyond GDP. It doesn't have to be, it's not the only indicator, and it shouldn't be the one thing that we base on, because as we have discussed, it does not account for women's unpaid care work, and also things like environmental degradation and the quality of health services or education services. The way that we view GDP, it doesn't account for that. So yes, we should also begin to think beyond GDP and center people and center the planet, center the environment. So I would just like to once again thank our panelists for thinking with us, dreaming with us, reimagining with us. It has been such a thought-provoking session. And I'd just also like to thank the audience for engaging and sharing. And it's been an absolute pleasure to host this session. And I can't wait to see what more comes out of these sessions. Thank you very much.